It's the battle of the dudes. Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland against Daniil Dubov from Russia. And this was an important game to see who would qualify for the next phase. So this was the final day of the preliminary round robin tournament in the Opera Euro Rapid. 16 players, and they're all vying for that final knockout phase, which would of course only feature 8 players. So 8 players would be eliminated at the end of this third day. I hope that's clear to you. So Duda with the white pieces against Dubov. Both very enterprising players. Well, they're the kind of younger generation. Duda's 22 years old. Dubov is 24 years old. And it's a Slav, so a lot of tension there. Lots of pieces on the board, and it's all about the pawn breaks. Who's going to push forward? So here, black challenges white's centre with c5. Opens up that bishop. Threats here. So already that centre is really unstable. d5 is the most popular move here. e5 played. Also has been seen before. In fact, there are some very old games in this line. Knight g5. Duda goes on the attack straight away. It's a little bit unusual, but it has been played before. And I think this rather caught out Dubov. There's an old game of Alexander Alekhine, of course, world champion, from Geneva 1925, which went knight e4 here. It's not a bad move. But instead, Duda played a sacrifice. Knight takes e6, and, well, as far as I know, this hasn't been played before, incredibly, because it looks so attractive. A check here. Now, you can either block with g6 or play the king to f8. If king f8, then simply f4 with the idea f5, and the attack just kind of rolls on. It's very difficult for black's pieces here to connect with the king side when the king is on f8, and just white has a really powerful attack. So that didn't happen. Instead, g6 played by Dubov, and the next piece was thrown onto the fire. Now, not queen takes rook. After knight f8, then black can actually defend, but instead just queen takes pawn on g6. So at this moment, white is 2 pieces down. Now, the queen can't do much on its own. It needs a rook to travel around rapidly to the f file. Well, that's not possible. But anyway, in the meantime, bishop h6 check, which wins some material back. But we still got a very favourable balance for black with these 3 minor pieces against a rook. But white does have a lot of pawns that he can take. He's already taken a few. Position repeated, and queen takes pawn on e6. So it's rook and 4 pawns against 3 minor pieces. A really unusual balance. And black's big problem here is that it's really hard to bring those pieces across to the defence. And now the rook comes into the middle. You never know, it might swing up the board, or it might just support that pawn advancing. Knight f8 attacks the queen, which retreats with check. This is black's problem, the king very exposed. And now d5. The pawn advances. So that shuts out this bishop. And those 2 pawns look really impressive. And they control so many squares here. Very hard to see how black can defend here. If bishop takes pawn, this is nice. Then we'll push on with e6. Now that pin is really annoying for black. In the meantime, queen h5 check is threatened. The 5th rank is now open, and then rook takes bishop. very hard for black to get out of that successfully. So after d5, knight h7 covers the king. In fact, my computer prefers queen d7, but that is still not at all clear. But anyway, knight h7 played. And here, Duda pushed again. But that does give black some counterplay because that opens up the bishop's diagonal. Instead, I think just a cool move, rook e1. So both pawns are supported when they are pushed with both rooks behind the pawns. That will give those pawns so much force, as well as the fact that it might be possible to swing the rook over as well. But basically it's to do with supporting the pawns. But instead d6, and now very unclear again. Bishop comes to h4. e6, I mean this looks wonderful, but actually, well, queen g5 is the best move actually here. And one of the ideas is that after this exchange, black has some really nasty threats in the offing. Knight h3 check, you've got to watch out for that rook coming across to g8. This is nasty stuff. And the knight might well come to e4 as well. So queen g5 looks like the best move, but queen f6 played instead. Well, I think Dubov is just hoping to get this rook to g8, and it does look really terrifying. e7 played. So those pawns getting closer. Bishop c6. Sort of trying to cover those squares. Now at the moment d7, well, it's not quite working because you can take that pawn. So, well, for the moment g3, which stops the immediate danger of rook g8 and taking on g2. Anyway, rook g8. Of course, the bishop can't be taken because there's a pin. So queen to h5. And now in the middle of all this chaos, with these pawns stomping down the board, with a potential attack on the king for black, Dubov very coolly swipes a pawn on the other side of the board, but it does mean his queen puts some pressure on g3, so that there is now a threat to take on g3 in combination with these pieces. Incredible stuff. And Duda now comes up with a fantastic move. I think a really creative move. What would you play here if you had the white pieces, bearing in mind that black is threatening to take on g3? Well, d7 wouldn't achieve anything because I can just take here. But Duda played rook d5. It's a wonderful move. So it blocks out the bishop, that's one thing, and the rook might well swing across to attack the king as well. And this was taken. Queen takes. So now black has two extra pieces. And the best thing to do here is actually to give up one of those extra pieces like this and play rook e8. And it's just a very unclear position. But in this position, Dubov played what looks like a strong move. He brings the knight over to attack the queen. The knight also covers these squares. And the bishop, you can see, maintains potential threats here as well. You know, it might give black a draw in some circumstances. And, well, almost instantly came Duda's reply. So what did Duda play here? This is quite extraordinary. You ever think, I'll have a slurp? Here's the move. Are you ready? Queen takes rook fantastic. With the idea that if king takes, you play d7. And one of those pawns is going to make it to the end of the board, in spite of the fact that there's a knight there. So 2 threats, basically. And this should be winning for white. For example, here, check. And we don't even need to bring the rook round. We can actually take the bishop. So after queen takes, what a shocker, Dubov took with the knight. Now that meant that Duda could get his queen back. So now it's rook and how many pawns? I'm losing count completely. Rook and 2 pawns against bishop and knight should be winning for white because the king's still exposed. That pawn still looks good. Now here there was a check from Duda. It's probably best just to play d7 or rook d1. Just supporting the pawn, and it must be winning. Instead he played check. And that kind of let Dubov off the hook a little bit. He's now defending. d7 still looks good for white, but knight f7, magically, Dubov has managed to coordinate his pieces and he's hanging on here. This is not easy for white to win at all. I mean, it's incredible how black finds coordination here. Check. King f8, queen e6. Still should be good for white, but let's see. c4, rook d5. Dangerous move. Now it's black's turn to push. Rook f5. King protects. And now, here's an interesting moment because, well, here sensibly Duda played king g2. Because if he plays like this and gets a new queen, it's not winning. Because after this, double attack. Matters aren't so clear. Well, they are. They're winning for black, basically. Because if rook here, you can take and take the queen. So, such a tricky position. So that's why king g2 was played. Just good to get the king off the back rank. b3. Dubov has found time to push this b pawn. But this is actually winning for white. If white plays rook f4 with the idea rook g4 check, not an easy maneuver to find, then white is actually winning. Not simple at all. There's another little trick here. Rook f3 looks incredibly strong. Attack the queen, then take the pawn, but no. Wow, if that had happened, forking king and queen. Nope. So anyway, rook f4 was the winning move, but instead Duda took on a6, b2, bishop d8, check. Queen takes bishop, so we've got passed pawns on the 7th, incredible, and white is 3 pawns up, but it's black's move, that's the crucial thing. And here is where Dubov blundered. He made a queen, which looks kind of tempting, but instead he should give a check on c2. Now, bringing the king back is fatal. The king has to go up. Queen h7 check. If queen h4, white actually loses, because the king stops the pawn and then black queens. But instead, well, in fact, king g4 will lose as well after queen g6. And well, I can take you through this one here. And actually, the queens, the black queens get there first. That's mate. I mean, this is the kind of ludicrous thing the players were having to analyse. Basically, after queen c2, king h3, queen h7, king up will lose, the king has to go back, and that's just a draw by perpetual check. Well, we got our 4 queens on the board after this. Check. quick check on e8 rather. But in this case, white king is completely safe. Well, there was a bit of faffing around. A few checks first. That's for Duda to gain some time on the clock because they get an increment each time they make a move. It doesn't make any difference. Basically, white is going to queen, and Duda has brought the queen back here, and that just rules out any complications because after this check, he could simply interpose with his second queen. So that means that the white king is completely safe, and then vroom, time to advance those pawns. Wow, what a game. What an extraordinary game. Star move. Rook d5 in this position. That set up an incredible tactic. And then the superstar move, queen takes g8. Wow, wow, wow. Amazing stuff. Now, Duda won that one, but there were so many twists and turns in the final round because it looked as though both these players might be eliminated actually, but they both snuck through. And, well, the one player who at the start of the day you'd think he's going to make it through, Hikaru Nakamura, blew it. He lost in the last round to Sam Shankland, and he finished in 9th. Remember, it's the top 8 that go through. So Carlsen, Giri on 9.5, So on 9, Aronian and Vachier-Lagrave on 8.5, Duda 8, Radjabov 8, Dubov 7.5. They made it through to the knockout phase. But Nakamura and others, I'm afraid, were disappointed. So there we go. I'll be keeping you up to date with what happens in the knockout. We have, so I understand it, we have Carlsen against Dubov is one of the matches in the quarterfinals. So watch out for that. Thanks very much for watching.